You know what blows my mind? The way ancient Greek philosophy completely transformed early Christian thought is like discovering that your favorite song was actually a remix of something written centuries ago. The original track was Plato and the Stoics, but the Christian remix? That changed everything.
Well, that's a fascinating way to look at it. And we're not just talking about a few borrowed ideas. This was a complete philosophical fusion that shaped Western civilization.
Exactly right. Take Augustine of Hippo. Here's this brilliant 4th century thinker who reads Plato's concept of the form of the good and has this huge realization. Hey, this perfectly describes our understanding of God.
And that connection wasn't just superficial, was it? Both concepts represented this ultimate source of goodness and truth that illuminates human understanding.
Oh man, and that's just the beginning. The way these early Christian thinkers handled Plato's ideas about the soul, that's where things get really interesting. They're reading Phaedo, where Plato talks about the soul being eternal and seeking reunion with the divine. And they're thinking, this fits perfectly with our belief in eternal life.
Well, at least until someone like Origen took it a bit too far with his ideas about pre-existing souls, right?
Right? Well, that's exactly what happened. Origen got into hot water for pushing that Platonic influence a little too far. But you know what's fascinating? Even when they had to reject certain aspects of Greek philosophy, they did it in this incredibly thoughtful way.
So how did they manage that balancing act? I mean, they're basically trying to merge two completely different worldviews.
Well, take the cardinal virtues, for example. Here's Ambrose of Milan looking at these totally pagan concepts: wisdom, courage, temperance, justice. And he basically says these work perfectly alongside our Christian virtues of faith, hope, and charity. It's like he's creating this beautiful moral mashup.
That's really interesting because the Stoics were doing something similar with their concept of natural law, weren't they?
Oh my gosh, yes! And this is where it gets really cool. When Paul writes in Romans about Gentiles having God's law written on their hearts, he's basically speaking Stoic philosophy with a Christian accent. Then fast forward to Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century, and he's still working with these same concepts.
You know what fascinates me about the Stoic influence? The way their ideas about handling suffering got transformed in Christian thought.
The Stoic sage becomes the Christian saint. But with this crucial difference, instead of just enduring suffering with that stiff upper lip, Christians found meaning in suffering through faith. Like take Ignatius of Antioch's letters. He's facing martyrdom with this incredible Stoic-like resolve. But it's all framed within this larger story of spiritual growth.
That transformation of ideas seems to be a recurring theme. They weren't just copying and pasting from Greek philosophy.
Not at all. Look at how they handled the Stoic concept of apatheia, this idea of freedom from destructive passions. Christians looked at that and thought, okay, self-control is good, but completely suppressing emotions? That's not going to work for a religion based on love.
Well, that must have created some interesting tensions, especially when it came to Platonic dualism.
Oh man, that's where things get really complicated. Because on one hand, they're totally into this Platonic idea of prioritizing the spiritual over the material. But then they have to square that with believing in the bodily resurrection and the fundamental goodness of creation.
So how did they resolve that contradiction?
Well, this is where the Cappadocian Fathers really showed their intellectual chops. They managed to use Platonic ideas about the soul's ascent to God while still insisting on the importance of the body. Gregory of Nyssa, writing around 335 to 395 CE, developed this incredibly sophisticated synthesis that influenced Christian thought for centuries.
That's quite a balancing act they pulled off.
And you know what's really wild? The impact of this synthesis is still with us today. I mean, when modern Christians talk about virtue ethics, natural law, or the relationship between reason and faith, they're drawing on this incredible intellectual foundation built by these early thinkers.
Well, that makes me wonder about how they made these philosophical ideas accessible to ordinary believers.
That's actually one of the most impressive things they did. Take the Stoic ideas about providence and submission to divine will. They transformed these complex philosophical concepts into practical guidance for daily Christian living. Justin Martyr was particularly good at this, showing how the Stoic logos was like a philosophical preview of Christ.
And I suppose that gave Christianity some serious intellectual credibility in the Roman world.
Exactly. But here's what's really fascinating. They had to be incredibly selective about what they borrowed. They couldn't just accept everything wholesale. Like they had to reject the Stoic idea of complete self-sufficiency because it conflicted with the Christian emphasis on divine grace.
That selective adaptation really shaped Western thought in profound ways, didn't it?
Oh man, in ways we're still discovering. Medieval scholasticism, Renaissance humanism, modern Christian theology, you can trace so much of it back to this initial synthesis. Even the way we think about things like conscience and moral law today has roots in this ancient philosophical fusion.
Well, that really puts things in perspective. We're still living with the results of decisions made nearly 2,000 years ago.
And maybe that's the biggest takeaway here. How powerful ideas can be when they're thoughtfully adapted and transformed rather than just rejected or blindly accepted. These early Christian thinkers weren't afraid to engage with the best philosophical ideas of their time, but they did it in a way that created something entirely new and enduring.
That's quite a legacy they left us.
You know what's really mind-blowing? The way this synthesis influenced Christian mysticism. Plato's emphasis on contemplation of eternal truths got transformed into these incredible mystical traditions. Someone like Meister Eckhart in the 13th century is still working with these ideas, just taking them in completely new directions.
So in a way, these early Christian thinkers were like intellectual bridge builders, weren't they?
Absolutely right. They were building bridges between different worlds of thought, and those bridges are still standing today. That's what makes this whole story so relevant. It shows us how powerful ideas can be when they're approached with both respect and creativity.